Hey everybody, this is Perch. Are comics meant to be an alone, singular, kind of not shared hobby? Now, I've done this channel for several years now. One of the consistent things I've said is that I enjoy the idea of being able to talk to people like they're in a comic store. And it's not quite like that, of course, because I'm talking and I can't hear anybody's comments back, and I read the comment boards from time to time. But um, it's not a discussion. It's one way. And somebody was pointing this out to me a couple days ago that basically, my channel is in some ways, and a lot of YouTube channels for that matter, are in some ways the distillation of what actual comic fandom is like. And the social media conversations around comics is abnormal. And if your head is spinning right now, the basic argument is comics kind of are and meant to be a one person reading one comic singular activity. And it's not really meant to be a group activity. It's not a team sport. It's not something that a bunch of people all come together and they do. It is, a enjoyment for one person. It's not a shared experience. As I was having this argument, because I didn't agree, and I still don't agree, but I find it interesting enough to want to talk about. You could say the same thing, arguably, about movies and music. And the counter to that was, well, no, with movies, home movies notwithstanding, when you would go to the theater, you would choose to voluntarily go in with a bunch of strangers and you would sit there and it would be a shared experience. When you go to a concert, you're there with hundreds and thousands of people. And for many people, going to the theater or going to a concert is kind of the end game of, those experiences. Again, I think with streaming services, I'm not sure I buy that anymore. I say I'm not sure I don't buy that anymore, but okay. But comics, you don't go somewhere to read the comics together. You go somewhere to buy the comics, and then you put the comics in a bag, and then you go home and you read them. You don't sit around together and hang out and have a shared experience. And the argument was maybe that's why. Maybe that is the reason why so many kind of interactions with comics are so awkward and so strange, and in some cases turn so argumentative. Now, I can agree with that part. I've been in the shop, and I'm sure you guys have too at some point, where you've had two, way overhyped fans going at it over who is stronger. Is it Wonder Woman or is it Captain? Actually, nobody makes that argument, but is it the Hulk or is it Thor? Is it Superman or is it Silver Surfer? You'll have these very, very drawn out arguments with people bringing up all kinds of science to defend their point when these are just comic creations. But the argument is it's people who have baked on their ideas alone for a long time now coming finally together and finding that it's a very awkward conversation with another human being. If you go down this path and you accept it too much, then I guess we also have to accept that are all comic readers, are people who gravitate toward comics, are they introverts? Are these people? I mean, certainly it's true of a lot of the creators, but is this true of the readers as well? Is this hobby really just meant for people who kind of like their own alone time and they want to read their comics and they want to immerse in that fantasy land? They don't really want to be around other people. One aspect to this, again, I don't like this idea, and it doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't fit, and I don't think you can just categorize human beings so easily. But there's one aspect of this that fits. There's a couple. Well, actually, for that matter, if I'm being truly honest, there's several aspects that fit, but I still don't think that makes the whole true. But one aspect that fits is, for a long time, people inside of comics, the creators and the publishers, have struggled with the idea of why isn't Dungeons and Dragons and comics more of a crossover audience? But if you look at the numbers, if you look at kind of demographics, and there's been a lot of searching on this, I don't know if there has been the last couple of years, but certainly in the 90s and the aughts, there was a advertising dollars that were spent. There was attempts to try and figure out, this should be a crossover audience. It's a, nerd geek culture meets nerd geek culture should go together great. But typically it doesn't. And in the comic shop, I certainly had gaming nights where people could come in and play games, and they could play card games, and they could play other things. Dungeons and Dragons and the more involved group games never did well in my store. I know they've done well in others. I know it's a thing. But the other kind of common piece I hear from other comic shop owners, and it's my experience as well, is that there wasn't a huge crossover between the audiences. People coming into the Wednesday Warriors buying in comics were rarely the people who would show up for game night. They would rarely be the people who wanted to collect cards or wanted to do this kind of stuff. They were not the same audience. Now, comic creators, there's certainly a number of creators who like Dungeons and Dragons, talk about it all the time. In fact, over the last couple of years, that seems to have gotten a lot more popular with more people. I'm not talking about the people who've been doing kind of, that kind of stuff for a while, like Jim Zub for that matter, who's been involved in both creating for, Wizards of the Coast and others for quite some time. But more recently, in some ways it feels fatty, not fatty, but fad, F-A-D. I know where your head is going. It's it's any chance slip in a dance lot joke. Anyway, it seems more fad-y right now to have Dungeons and Dragons, certainly wrestling. What's curious about wrestling is that wrestling is probably less popular than it's been for quite a long time. This isn't the 90s when you had that stuff running on, but regardless. It would make some sense if you have a game like Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering or something where there is a group activity involved where you have to interact as a group, and comics, which again it's a singular lonely activity to some extent. Why they wouldn't cross over, and they don't seem to. But I've been stuck thinking about this for a while. It kind of where the argument went is look at kind of the arguments going into the comic shop, and then look at it in a world where you don't have to reveal your identity and you don't have to suffer any of the consequences. And not that a fight would ever break out in a comic shop between who would win, in a battle between, I don't know, Deathstroke and Deadpool. But there was still that we see people in person, so we're not going to start throwing punches. We're not going to start just going after somebody, calling them a Nazi or fascist for liking Deathstroke more. There's that doesn't exist in real life, but it certainly is something people go to in social media. So is this a case where you've got people who really have their singular alone activity, and they're interacting in a platform which is pretty designed to bring out the absolute worst in people? And is that just a really terrible combo? It feels like it is. So I don't know. I wanted to share this with the rest of you and kind of get your thoughts on it. Is this true? Is this a different way to look at comics? And is this one of the reasons why so many of these arguments and so many of these discussions, and hell, so much of the interaction sometimes between creators and fans are so awkward, are so like chewing on tinfoil? They feel like they're not normal. Is it because we're trying to make something happen in a hobby that really is just not designed for that to happen? Is this a case where if people want to just read their comics and enjoy themselves? They don't want to get into all this other stuff, and yet it keeps getting pushed and forced on them. And is the social media arguments just a natural evolution of comic store fights with no guardrails, with no worry that you're about to be punched in the mouth, with no comic shop owner going, "Hey guys, calm down"? I mean, I've had to referee some arguments in comic shops from time to time, not often, but you can kind of get a sense where it's moving from being kind of just, geek fantasy into somebody is, people are legitimately getting heated and stuff's, about to be thrown. And I've yet said, like, hey, let's, it's not important. Hey, here's something to distract everybody with. Let's stop with that. But there were definitely feelings hurt, and you could see, people getting into arguments. And I mean, there were customers that were longtime customers who were a little socially awkward, let's just put it that way, who'd get themselves into very bizarre, kind of long, winding fights, usually with conspiracy theories and all this other stuff linked into it. Because one thing about comic shop customers, fans that come in, is they do tend to be experts in a lot of things, way more things than most. And in some cases, that expertise is, let's just say questionable. But, I've had people get so angry during fights that you could see their kind of faces red and they're about to, and then I don't see them for a while. Like a month and a half will go by. And eventually I'll have to email per like, hey, you got your box here. Do you still want to come in and get it or everything else? And then they kind of reluctantly, the person will come back to the table but it's not uncommon that you get that kind of interaction. So is this just a case of comics at their core are a lonely, are a singular, are an individual activity, and forcing a group on it is forcing something that is just not designed to be there? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know your feelings on all this. If you're like me, you disagree, but it's uncomfortable enough that at least you pause to think a little bit, because there is some truth to it. Anyway, let me know your thoughts below. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.